And,
Let me just reconnect here. Microphone. Oh, this one seems to work. All right. But that's not the echo. That's not the owl. Sid, Jeff, can you hear us?
I can now. Yep.
Jeff, can you hear us?
He's muted.
Yes. Nope. Now you can
Sorry,
hear us,
Dr.
Jeff?
Gordon. I was trying to get unmuted and it was not cooperating, but I can hear you now. Yes, thank you.
Okay. So we will note that Sid Blodgett and Jeff Marcotte are here. I was informed that Nancy Frazier is not able to be here tonight and that Doug Porter is not able to be here tonight. So we do have a quorum. Designation of alternates. I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I need 2 alternates, and we actually have 2 alternates here tonight. So unless there's an objection or our 2 alternates run away, I will seat Dwight Reinowitz and Dean Gould. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So we will note that for the record. Let me put that here. Alternate seated, not present. Not present. Okay. That takes us then to Pledge of Allegiance. We could stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, liberty, and justice for all. Thank you. I'm going to get into my chair's report. First of all, thank members of the public who are here. We always welcome people coming on, and I think we have some folks virtual as well. I'll just ask people who, other than commissioners, to keep yourself muted on Zoom, so that way we don't pick up any background noise or echoes or things like that. Unless there's an objection, I'm going to incorporate agenda item 8A ZEO office into my chair's report because it's going to be easier that way. Because there's a few things I do have to state and announce. No objection. So my chair's report, and I'll try to be quick. My usual thank yous to commissioners for our meetings twice a month. I know I missed all the fun at our last meeting for the annual legal training session, but I heard it was a blast and was very good. And that Attorney Roberts did a wonderful job. So we thank Rich for once again with the annual legal training session. And thank you to staff. Thank the work that Dan's done. I'll get into that in a minute. Thank you, Delia. Thank you, Amy. And also Tracy, who is up in the office as the land use department clerk, but doesn't come to our meetings. So we appreciate the work she's been doing for us behind the scenes for the commission. I was going to bring up, and I will actually, about if we will hold our May 4th meeting. This month we're off schedule. And we're back on our usual first and third Thursday schedule as of May. So I was going to ask if people wanted the meeting, which is next week. However, one of the things that's coming up is agenda item 7A is commercial cannabis regulations that we were going to take back up, but we're not ready for that then tonight? Okay. So if we're not going to take that up tonight, that makes the meeting shorter. Unless you want me to make my chair's report longer, and I can do that. So I'll assume there's objection to that. So in which case, would we be ready next week, Delia, to do commercial cannabis regulations?
Yeah.
Does anybody, commission, have any objections? Sid, Jeff, anybody here? That since we're not evidently ready tonight to discuss the commercial cannabis regulations, and Delia, you have stuff you need to be showing us and putting together based upon what we've been discussing and quote unquote deciding for our draft. Would we be fine then for next week, our planning meeting, to have commercial cannabis regs as our topic? Any issue? Okay with you, Jeff and Sid?
Fine with
Okay
me.
with it.
Okay, so that takes care of what the agenda item is gonna be for next week. Good. I will write up the agenda tonight and submit it to the town clerk, and she'll see it on Monday. So we will note that. So let me put that here. So again, we're back on our usual schedule as of May. So, and just remember, May 4th is Star Wars Day. So in case any of you don't know, yeah, I'll post once again about it. So, I do need to bring up about the office. So that's why I need to leapfrog it up. As we know, Dan is transitioning out as CEO. I believe he's still going to be dealing with inland wetlands and watercourses agency, which is not our purview. But he's not really doing CEO. I think he's going to be available to help to a minimal degree in whatever transition. Right now, there is not anybody evidently qualified to be hired or looked into for the permanent position. That is still ongoing. When I've had a discussion with the first selectman. My understanding is that the Board of Selectmen are working with Mike D'Amato for him to be the temporary CEO. My understanding is that's likely to come on board May 1st, which is Monday. But it's not a definite, but that seems to be the plan. For those of you who, I forget how long ago this was. Several years or so ago, Mike stepped in to be acting CEO, temporary CEO. So looks like he'll be doing that, again. My understanding is there is nobody else. There have been a few people who evidently expressed interest, but didn't seem to have qualifications, which is important if you're going to be doing zoning and zoning enforcement and issuing certain permits. So there is going to be a transition. I did speak with Dan. I did speak with Jay Swan that I'm happy to meet with Mike to let him know about some of the work that the commission is doing to bring him up to speed. Dan has or will be speaking with Mike about some enforcement matters that are ongoing and that Mike will have to pick up. One of them, I think he already knows from previous experience, but he'll have to step back into it. We can get into that later in the meeting when we get to ZEO enforcement, and I can update the commission about my discussion with Dan and anything on another matter that you have, but we can do that later in the meeting. So there is a plan in place as best as we can do. I do not know exactly how many hours are being contracted, but that's something that is in the purview of the selectmen, but we do have to keep in mind that we did go from 4 days a week to 2 days a week, but the work hasn't slowed. And there's still the work this commission does that does require ZEO work. So we'll see where that pans out. One thing is that we would need to do for tonight is, since Mike is the one scheduled to come on board, in which case then for him to be our agent and act on our behalf, because we're the ones, for lack of a better term, are kind of the be all and end all of the zoning regulations, and we're the ones that make the ultimate determinations of them. But nevertheless, we delegate a number of things to the zoning enforcement officer. Would be if he's slated to come on board May 1st or that week, it would then be May 4th that we have another meeting. We do need to have a vote to designate him as our zoning enforcement officer agent. That's been our practice. I did speak prior with Rich, and Rich is on, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, but since that's been our practice, we would need to continue that as far as how we vote and designate. So I can open that up to tonight, but it would make sense to me, since Mike is the one slated to come on, that we would need to have a vote either tonight or next week to designate him. So that way we're not tripping him up coming in and him doing the work. My recommendation would be that we do it tonight, because if potentially he comes on Monday, let's say, and he has to start doing work, we don't want to create any legal issue if we haven't done that formality. But I open up for what the commission wishes to do.
Can we, actually, he doesn't have the job yet. Can we do that if he's not officially?
My understanding is that that is the one who's coming on. If we wanted, we can wait until May 1st, and then that would to see if indeed he's coming on. That is what I've been told. That would then mean May 4th. We'd have to do it at some point soon.
Yeah, I just wondered if it's legal to do it before he's officially hired.
Well, let me ask Rich. Rich? Could we go ahead, since it looks like Mike D'Amato is the man coming on to be temporary CEO, potentially maybe as soon as Monday, can we take a vote tonight to designate him as our agent?
Yeah, subject to him being engaged by the town effective May 1st.
Or if it turns out that he's not starting until, let's say, May 5th or something, we're designating him as our agent as of his start date.
Right.
Okay. That answered the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, so I'll make a motion to vote.
Let me just write this down. So, do you mind if we use the term authorized? Thank you. So we'd authorize him as of his start date, provided he is indeed hired. My understanding is he is, so, but we can qualify that. Let me just write that here, CEO. So it would be, it would really be so it could be the agent for the P and Z as CEO.
How many, excuse me, how many hours? Still staying the same or?
I'll get
is
in
it
that.
Increased in the budget?
Well, I'll mention that in one quick minute. I just want, if you don't mind, if I can just write,
Okay.
I just want to write the motion down so I have it here. When he starts. All right. Yeah. Okay. And that was you, David?
Yes.
So motion by Joe Adaletta, seconded by David Morse. I don't know exactly how many hours. I advocated that, we ideally should go back to where we were, which was 4 days a week. And that was one of the struggles Dan faced. Doing 4 days a week work in 2 days is tough. Then you have to do the work for the commission. Then he was also doing work for inland wetlands. I think he was doing work with ZBA, but they don't meet every month. So I think the busiest part of the land use department is planning and zoning.
Mhm.
So I don't know how many hours. I haven't seen the contract. I'm waiting to learn more about exactly how many hours are going to be, for him to be hired temporary. I don't know how long it's going to be, but it might be a bit of time. So last time it was a bit of time. So once I know more about that, I can let you know. But we do have it very clear in our bylaws, and we've gone through this some years ago, that we don't do the CEO work. We're not quote unquote hired by the town to do that. And we don't do that. So. Any other questions on the motion? Okay, I'll go through the roll. Joe Adaletta. Sid Blodgett.
Aye.
Jeff Gordon, I will vote aye. Dean Gould. Jeff Marcotte.
I,
David Morse. Joe Palula.
Aye.
Present. Dwight Reinowitz. Without objection, that so passes. Thank you. The other thing I'm going to mention, and this is a follow-up from my last chair's report, is, as you know, we are required to be listed to do a certain number of hours of training per the state. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rich, but any commissioner who attended your annual legal training session and who didn't attend the Connecticut Bar Land Use Seminar, do they get credit for that training, having attended the commission meeting for annual legal training?
Yes,
Okay. So
at least an hour, even if it seemed longer.
So you're saying that I should write down that it was like really 10 hours in reality?
We'll stick with one for now.
Okay. So I will look at the meeting minutes, and we're keeping track of, Dan should have an Excel file because I had sent him one, that if any of you attended the Connecticut Bar, then you get credit. And if you didn't, but you attended the annual legal training session, you get credit. But Rich, is that credit for the non-affordable housing hours? Because there's
Yes.
1 hour you have to do for affordable housing.
Yeah, we didn't talk about affordable housing at our
Okay.
training.
So, and any commissioner who hasn't otherwise met it, we have to have it met by the end of the calendar year. So we are keeping track of it. So, that's all I have right now, for chair's report. I'll get into some other issues later in the meeting. Citizens' comments, any comments from citizens not on anything on the agenda? This takes us to meeting minutes, which is one of the most exciting parts of our meeting, actually. We have two sets of minutes. One is from March 16th, which is the commission's monthly business meeting. And the other is the April 13th, the annual legal training session, and it's listed as special, but all the more special because Rich Roberts was able to do the annual legal training session for us. So those are the two sets of minutes that we have. What is the will of the committee?
Move to accept the minutes.
I have a couple comments.
I just gotta get the motion set, then I'll find you. I think there's a couple people that may have some comments, but let me just, so you, for both sets?
Yes.
So accept both meeting minutes. Is there a second? Okay. So motion by Moore, seconded by Adaletta to approve the March 16th, 23 monthly business meeting minutes and the April 13th, 23 special meeting / annual legal training session minutes. Now we can have a discussion. I'll recognize Joe Pula, then I'll recognize you, Delia. Yes, Joe.
Yeah, on page 3, number,
Of which meeting minutes?
the 16th,
Okay, so page 3.
page 3, by Roman number 14. I wanted to see the actual number of acres, not area.
So you're talking where it says on Roman numeral 14 on page 3, where it starts. Joe Pullock asked if there are any plans for additional buildings or infrastructure, and also would like to see the actual number of area. You're talking about, instead of area, it's acres?
Yes,
Okay, so that's an edit you would like to make?
yes, please.
Okay. Did you have anything else?
Let's see, on page 4. Page 25, Jeff Gordon confirmed that there will be no additional, not additional.
And I just want to correct that for myself. I didn't confirm it. I asked for confirmation. So if we can just say that, as an edit, asked for confirmation. Because that was a question I did ask.
Okay,
So, but you're saying then the word not should be no.
correct.
Okay. Anything else?
That's it.
Okay. Delia, you have,
Also, on the
Something-
minutes, 16th, page 4, small Roman numerals or 22, where it says Delia Fay asked if any fruits grown are sold to other operations. Eric Nelson noted that all produce grown is used in the Woodstock Treehouse ecosystem. I think that should say within the treehouse properties, because they use them at other treehouse businesses outside of Woodstock,
so
in
you,
addition to using it on the Woodstock property.
so your suggestion is around the word ecosystem?
That was the word that you used.
Right.
No, can't have you speak.
Maybe take out the word Woodstock, because the treehouse.
Okay.
is First of treehouse.
So remove the
businesses.
word Woodstock. Okay. Yeah, this is only for the commission. Because it's our minutes, so we can't have public input, so thank you. Was there anything else in those set of meeting minutes?
Um,
So let me just ask, just to make it easier, does anybody, Sid, Jeff, anybody have any edits on the March 16th? Okay,
I do not.
okay. You have something, Delia, on the April 13th? It will take 1 second, right?
Perhaps,
Because I like you, I'll give you I'll give you a minute.
well. Page 1.
Yep.
Where it says number 3, land use department, letter C. Where it says Rich notes that wording on special permits need to be clear, but special permit regulations need to include clarification on the length of permit for the details listed. It was my understanding that the time limits on special permits don't apply in Woodstock because we don't have site plan review. And site plan review approvals can have time limits, limiting the special permit approvals but that's more complicated. The regulation needs to be clear about the separation of uses. Various uses can have more detailed standards for each special permit than are currently in the regulation.
So what is it that you're looking for in a proposed edit? Your whole comment bubble?
Yes.
Okay.
And then
Well, wait a minute, though. You have that to show?
I didn't.
Oh, okay. But you'll share the comment bubbles? Oh, you do? Okay. All right.
That same letter C, but down to Roman numeral 2. Where it says criteria is what can and cannot take place in evaluating application standards or details about the use that need to be followed. My point was that criteria is used within the zoning regulations differently from standard. And I wanted to make it clear what we were talking about. We use criteria as the evaluation lists,
Mhm.
and the standards are the rules that the uses have to follow.
So that's another comment bubble that you have?
Yes, and then for
Okay.
letter D, I wasn't sure what it meant when it said build office building. Did you mean building official? Or it says Rich noted a case from Westport of an application to cut trees and build office building submitted in 2004.
It was cut trees and build and office building. That was the proposal.
Okay, so we just put the word "and" in. Okay, we're making your minutes longer.
Page 2,
Fred Rich would be unhappy.
it's on the first.
Where are you on page 2?
Says the commission then close the hearing without a decision being made. And the point is that the commission doesn't make a decision during the hearing. You close it and then during the deliberation, they make a decision.
Oh, is that really more semantic?
Well, if this
They
is a
close the
training,
hearing.
I think the training should be not confusing people about when the decision takes place.
Okay, so what is your comment bubble on that one?
The commission then closed the hearing.
And just get,
So take out without a decision being made, because they're not supposed to make a decision.
right, I think
during
more the, I think I read that as saying that they closed the hearing and there's no decision because you can't during the hearing, and then they met additionally, which you do, and then they made the decision tonight, but if your edit is to remove without a decision being made, I'll defer to the commission, but we can do that in an edit. Do you have anything else? Okay,
A little bit farther down the page says, Joe wanted to put conditions on use and scope of use, which recommends the approval letter include the details of any conditions. This is not a permit, more a memo for the file. And I would suggest that be changed to the details of the approval should be included in any correspondence sent to the applicant, and that should be in the file.
so you have an edit there, and do we know which Joe? Would you? So we can just also make a note that that's Joe Adaletta. Do you have anything else?
That's it.
Okay. Does anybody have anything else on the meeting minutes from April 13th? Anything, Sid? Jeff?
No, thank you.
Okay, so then
I'm
that
all set.
takes us. Okay, so hearing no further discussion, we'll go ahead and take a vote. Joe Adaletta. Sid Blodgett, Jeff Gordon, I will vote aye. Dean Gould. Jeff Marcotte,
Abstain.
David Morse,
Aye.
Joe Palulik,
Aye.
Dwight Reinowitz. Without objection, that so passes. And I will once again state, Amy, that you have an unbroken record of your minutes being approved by this commission. We can deny them. We can say no. I don't know if we're saying yet, I don't know if we're saying yes because we're afraid of you and don't want to say no, or we're saying yes because you're doing a good job, and maybe it's both.
Either one is your issue.
I am just happy we've never encountered in my 16 years here. Actually, once we voted to table minutes because we had a disagreement about them, but we squared that away. All right, so moving on, that takes us to new business. This is agenda item 5A 292 Route 169, the Old Pineapple non-residential zoning permit. Is this something you reviewed, Delia, or was this Dan? Okay, okay. So I'll ask my usual questions that I normally will ask the zoning enforcement officer, but I already know the answers, but I want them on the record. Is it a complete application? Dan did tell me yes. And have the fees that are required to be paid been paid? Dan had told me yes. So we'll just note that for the record because that's important. Otherwise, I didn't hear anything when I spoke with Dan recently about this item. He had told me, and I don't want to necessarily speak for him, but since he's not here, he had told me he had nothing to raise or concern. So, so he basically it is up to us at this point in time. I don't know if the applicant or applicant's representative is here tonight. Thank you for coming. You're not obligated to speak. We do give you the opportunity if you wish to do so. If you do, please state your name for the record. But we're welcome to hear from you. Otherwise, we have your application. If we happen to have any questions, we can certainly ask. But is there anything you wish to say tonight? Okay, but we do appreciate you coming. So we do want to give you the opportunity. So I'll open it then up to the commission. Any questions, comments? Joe Adaletta.
292, 169, and some of these. Property. 292, 169. Shows two buildings, building one, building two. And then further, there's another attached. That shows a third building. I'm just trying to understand. I'm talking about the same building. So building one and two. Which one? The one being considered for.
I believe it's I think it's building one, but I'll ask you if you can answer for us. I don't know if you can see the pictures, but the building that you're going into is when you go straight down the parking lot, the building straight ahead, not the one where Supreme Sheds has. So it's the one straight ahead, which I believe that's building one. Is it? It doesn't have the porch over it, does it?
Right.
Yeah, it's building one. It's building one. Yes. Yep, that's the,
Trying to clarify.
but we'll note that then, that it, on this plan, it's referring just to building one, not to building two. Thank you, Joe. Did you have anything else?
Yeah, so, because this is a retail operation, do we know it's fully operating under a special permit? Does retail operation require a special permit?
This, I don't think this was,
That properties had retail and
well,
probably every building that's on the property, there should be grandfathered.
it's been retail for a very long time.
Had retail in the properties, in the buildings before.
I understand, I just didn't know. If it was
The last business that was there, that is moved out, we granted that as a non-residential zoning permit.
okay.
We didn't do it as a special permit. The special permit we did approve was to allow a house. But then that was withdrawn later. They never filed and they wanted it voided, and so we voided it. But the last couple of businesses, my understanding was, were non-residential zoning permits in that building.
Okay, so it had not been grandfathered with retail operation.
If it was a new use of the property, it would require a special permit. But because the property in that building has had retail before, it was grandfathered. The only reason why the property needed a special permit in the past is to add residential use, which it had never had before, since the adoption of zoning. Going back to the history of the town, perhaps before zoning, there may have been something there.
Any other outside of this, other retail application coming in for a retail application?
You mean on a raw piece of land that has not had retail before? No.
Okay. And then finally, and this may be a question for Rick Roberts, but that the property owner, I think the same property owner. And there's clearly an enforcement issue going on with the non-compliance with that particular property. And just want to make sure we're not going too far along and continue on. If the applicant is already non-compliant and is it appropriate to issue a permit?
Well, my understanding is, and Rich, you can help us with this. The Nielsen's own the whole property and the buildings. Scranton Shops is, their business. Supreme Sheds is in one building, as you know. We granted them a non-residential zoning permit, not a special permit. That business is non-compliant at this point in time. The other building where the old Pineapple is looking to go in, there is no compliance issue that we're aware of. So your point, Joe, then is if we grant this non-residential zoning permit, there's nothing that bumps into either way with the non-compliance issue of the other business that just happens to be in a different building on the overall property?
Who's responsible for correcting? Using the land or the landowner?
Wouldn't it be the business owner?
That was also asking the question.
But this is a different business.
Right.
And
So Rich, I don't know if that makes sense, what we're trying to ask, that there's nothing relative to the non-compliant issue with one business in another building on property that would affect us granting a non-residential zoning permit to this new business going into another building that doesn't have a compliance issue right now that we know of.
Yeah, I mean,
That
I
makes
don't think you're undermining your position with respect to being able to enforce against the non-compliant person by granting a permit that's unrelated to it. You know, unless your regulations say something about that, and I don't think they do. And I don't know whether any of the other people who are remote are having trouble, but I couldn't really hear some of what either of the Joes was saying. I mean, it was like every 3 out of 5 words was coming through well, but I got the idea.
We seem to be having some sort of audio issue with the OWL device, unfortunately.
Same with me. Always difficult to hear, but you, Jeff and Delia seem to be coming clear, and the other side of the room, Dave and the other Joe seem to be kind of okay, usually.
I think we're having to run the microphone off the computer because for some reason the OWL device doesn't want to let us use its microphone. So we're trying as best as we can with the audio. So given whatever's going on with the other device. But so Rich, Joe Adeletta's question is, who is responsible for correcting an existing non-compliance? Is it the business owner or the property owner?
Well, you should probably be issuing the notices to both of them.
That answer your question?
So, the notices go to both, but who has?
So Joe Adeletta wants to know who has to fix it. Do both have to fix it, or it's ultimately the business owner? Or
One or the other of them has to fix it, yeah. I mean, because just the fact that the business is the one that's doing the, you know, that's not in compliance. You know, it's on property owned by the property owner, and when there's a zoning violation, you have the right to enforce against the tenant, the occupant, and the owner.
that answer your question?
It's getting there. And I think during that legal training, we found that, or I certainly learned that by statute, the zoning enforcement officer
We
found it's an ordinance, we need schedule. Which clarified, identified in the statutes, there is wording that permits the zoning enforcement to impose fines, whether we want him to or not. CEO. But I'm just worried that there's not compliance issues.
And it's going to be, it's later on our agenda that we're going to discuss what to do about it.
I thought it was like
It is, but it's a different business, yeah. And we've talked over many years and we've drafted fine ordinances right out of what I believe inland wetlands is allowed. We've never been able to get traction with different boards of selectmen over the years.
we don't need an ordinance.
Right. But that, that would be a separate, yeah, so we can do that. So did you have any other questions about the application, Joe?
No, only that I'm looking to approve it. Rest of it.
Through the chair,
Right.
with all due respect to Joe, I think this is a separate issue. I think we're talking about two different issues right now. And I think we need to approach that at another time, but right now we have this application before us. We should be looking at this and focusing on trying to either approve or deny this application And I don't think that this has any bearing on the landowner, you know, who's renting the property, or any of the other renters that are on that property. So I think that should be brought up at a separate time.
And I view it as, to me, I view it as two parallel tracks. One is we have an active, lengthy non-compliance, which we'll have later on the agenda as far as how we're going to further handle that item with a business. This is a completely separate business, albeit on the same property, but going to a separate building. And we're not aware of any compliance issues with that building. So I kind of view it as two separate tracks, that if this new business meets our regulations for non-residential zoning permit, what's happening with the other business is important, but I just see them as two parallel issues on the same property. And I don't see the non-compliance of one business affecting another business coming in a different part of the property that doesn't have the compliance issue. That's how I view it, as two parallel things, but ultimately it's up to the commission to decide what it wishes to do on this non-residential zoning permit. Jeff Marcotte, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a little tough to hear. So this applicant is looking to go into building one. Am I correct in hearing that?
You're correct.
And correct me if I'm wrong, didn't we approve within the last 24 months, didn't we approve another business to go in there? And the name of it escapes me. Am I wrong in saying that?
Yes, we did approve a business to go into that building. I forget when it was, via a
Okay.
non-residential zoning permit.
Good, those answer my question. So I'd like to make a motion to accept the application as presented.
Okay, so let me mark this down. So motion made by Jeff Marcotte, seconded by Dwight Reinowitz, to approve the non-residential zoning permit as presented. Discussion on the motion? Do you have a question, Jeff, or your hand is still just up? All right. If there's no further discussion or questions, then I'll call the roll. Joe Adaletta. He's not Mark Martin here. Sid Blodgett. Sid, you're muted. Okay.
Maybe you can do a thumbs up or thumbs down.
Without objection, I will take that as a yes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good, thank you. Sorry about that. That was my mistake.
Jeff Gordon, I will vote aye. Dean Gould. Jeff Marcotte.
Aye.
David Morse.
Aye.
Joe Palulik.
I'll abstain on this one.
Okay. That. Not here and here. Dwight Reinowitz. So we have one abstention, one no, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I believe. Yes, as it passes, so it does pass. Just want to record what the vote is, but you have a listing of how we voted anyway, so that will go into the minutes. Congratulations, welcome. It's always good to welcome new businesses to town. You'll have to do whatever needs to be done for post-approval, review, processing, whatever with these. So you can contact the land use department as soon as Monday, because the townhouse not open tomorrow. So, but thank you for being here. Okay, that takes us then to agenda item 6A. It is listed as preliminary discussion. It technically is a follow-up from preliminary discussion. because we had, as a commission, wanted to get some questions answered. And we did get some answers, and so this is the follow-up to that. I'll just remind everybody, including those who may not know, that when we deal with a preliminary discussion or this manner, for lack of a better term, a follow of a preliminary discussion, there is no actual application. So there's no docket number. This is not something that we're taking public input on because it's not an application. This is also non-binding as far as whoever we're talking with and on the behalf of the commission. But with that said, this is still nevertheless something that, we have had some discussions on. When anything further happens, then we deal with it accordingly. But we did want on some action items to find out what actually went on before. There was some question about that, but also some of it was because of what was the status of the files at the time. We did have, just so it's clear on the record, we did have some discussion to look into this. I did with Attorney Roberts, you were on and Dan was, so we could try to figure out what was the process before and what were the files or whatever. We did ask Dan to issue a letter, clarify, so it is in the record, what it is that he assessed and what was to answer the questions that we had relative to that, which was really the question we had. So we did ask Dan to issue a letter. Dan did so on April 11th, that we should all have copies of. And I believe you received copy. Okay, good. So I don't need, unless the commission wants me to read through the entirety of the thing. And we do have it here, but just to sum it up, he basically said that the current operations fall within state and our local definitions of agriculture, and our definition of agriculture matches the state. Because it's easy for us to have done that, and thus it was permitted. He said previously with what happened with the permit, by right under our regulations, he references a February 23rd, 2023 inspection, where he saw the acreage being used as a working farm, and that the rest of the acreage he observed to be in a natural state or containing ancillary farm structures, including a farmhouse, barns, greenhouses, and fermentation room, approved by the development rights agreement with the state of Connecticut. And he felt that the property's function and appearance clearly demonstrate a farm operation. He talked about the proposal to incorporate fermentation of beer into current operations, that it meets the current definitions of agriculture by the state and thus by our regulations, and allowed relative to PDR in a March 3rd, 2023 letter that had been issued to Treehouse Brewing, I believe, by the DOAG. And then he references that, and since he talks about no new structures, sign, driveways, upgrades are proposed, no events or food are offered or proposed, no increase in customer capacity is proposed, and the same level of activity is anticipated. He says the proposed new use will occur within existing interior space. Treehouse presently offers and proposes continuing limited sales and tasting as a direct sale permissible by the zoning regulations. So his sense was that this met a process that had been issued previously, and that he felt that there wasn't anything else that was needed to be done as far as going ahead and moving forward. I believe we also have a copy of, is it in here? I believe this must be, is this his signature? Yes, it is, DZM. Yep. April 13th, 2023, where he talks about under approval certification of local officials relative to the Department of Consumer Protection, Liquor Control Division. He did sign a permit. The next day, the fire marshal did. It is also in the last paragraph, he mentions, and I'm gonna read it because I think it's important to have in the record. Treehouse is combined by the PDR to use the property for agricultural purposes. Expanded uses such as, but not limited to, food trucks, concerts, and increased customer capacity may exceed the scope of the state and local definitions and requirements of agriculture and may require additional permitting. So he had put that notice into his letter, and that's where that stands. Correct me if I'm wrong, Delia, but I don't think there was anything else that had been discussed, and that's where we stand with it. So that's an answer to the commission's question as far as what was done before and what is being recommended or being done now as far as a process to follow. But again, he did make it clear in his letter about anything that is to go beyond or additional expansion or whatever, that clearly would then need to be discussed, potentially even come here for a permit decision, which we had talked about in the last meeting, including sale of food or whatever. So, but that's where that stands. So that was the question that we wanted to get clarified. And that's what Dan looked into and what was discussed and what's being brought forward today as far as the process to follow. But I'll open up to the commission if the commission has any questions on that. But that is where that stands. And again, my understanding is based upon that, he did sign off on a form. Did you have, anybody have anything otherwise? Because this is just the follow-up on that action item. Joe,
Then
the
I'll
letter.
have a quick comment about some preliminary discussion back from preliminary discussion. Just in the minutes. Dickinson had that they were planning to sell beer, and Valinsky replied, "We have to be more about." So, one point pretty clearly stated.
And I think and with that in mind, and I know this was discussed with the preliminary discussion that plans can change over time. I believe that's why Dan put into his last paragraph that if plans were to change at some point in the future, it's very clear in our record. And some things were unclear in the record previously. Dan wasn't involved, you weren't the CEO at the time. I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, just the file was a little unclear as far as what was documented. So it did take some time to sort through, but I think it's pretty clear in his letter what is being permitted at this point as far as the fermentation of beer and around the beer, but that if anything else were to be looked into a year from now, 10 years from now, it's clear on the record that things would need to be reviewed and discussed. And then deciding what permit process or whatever would have to go through. Yes, do you have
Just
to
want to say that their plans changed, that's why they came back.
Mhm.
That's why they're here.
And that's why we encourage people to come to us for preliminary discussions. Because I personally think it's a great help, not just for us, but I think it's also good for potential applicants to have discussions with us about where things stand. I think this was helpful because it did clarify in the record what was done previously and how and what's being done now. I think Dan did a good job clarifying, in the record for now, where it is. So if we have to dig this up and say 5 years, I think this record now is a lot better than it was that we encountered trying to figure it out, what happened before. Yes, Joe?
So is there a process going ahead that
They can move forward. They can move forward.
preliminary discussion from time to time? I think they were advocating that by right, they could go to a brewery as a right. Part of the discussion. If that's still the direction and maybe based on this letter, that seems to be the approach Treehouse may take. But does that mean no other permitting process or review? Or it does by right mean anybody who has the right to go ahead and do something. Just go ahead.
Well, Dale, you can probably speak better to it than I, but my understanding is that based upon this process and what Dan defined, he signed up on things.
It's my understanding that the city determined that it was fell under the definition of agriculture, which in which that is a permitted use.
Mhm.
But if they wanted to build structure, the structure needs a permit, but the use is permitted use, so the use didn't need a permit according to his stuff.
Because it's agriculture as defined by the state, as also allowed by the DOAG relative to the PDR and everything else for that property. That's what was handled before, and based upon his review, it fits the same process now, and he then signed off on it.
So try to draw a parallel in the zoning regulations in the community district. You also have single family homes as a permitted use. But when you build your structure, you need a permit for the structure, but the use doesn't need a special permit. It's already allowed.
Okay. So there wouldn't be any further review, presumably, like activity for this particular request. Will we?
What?
If I understand what you're saying.
Well, there wouldn't be right now. However, I think that doesn't end a potential, I wouldn't say review, but certainly a zoning enforcement officer can go back 6 months from now and verify they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and not exceeding or doing something different that they're not allowed to do. That certainly can be done. Or the commission can always ask to verify. Other than that, there wouldn't be any further review now. However, if for some reason there were to be a valid complaint made in good faith, the CEO would investigate it. Somebody were to say, hey, they're now lining up, 20 food trucks, every night. That wasn't what they're supposed to be doing, then that gets investigated. If it turns out, no, they're not, then fine. But there would be always that process as well if there was any concern raised. But also, as he made very clear in the last paragraph of his letter, if anything else is going to be proposed that expands the use or intensifies the use beyond what is being permitted, then that certainly would require a follow-up discussion and looking into what type of permit process would have to be followed.
Okay, I thought we might have had an opportunity to put more specific information to an approval letter. What the approval letter is supposed to be. But I was just looking forward to using some of the information that we heard in the last preliminary hearing from pre-hub, which is good. You indicate that's our understanding of what the interest is that we could specify, and I'm trying to look through my notes on that, but it was all. That's specific information on the site. Could be included.
Well, since there's no permit that this commission votes upon, there wouldn't be anything additional we would do. I think we have things clear in the record written by the zoning enforcement officer. We have things on the record of what was discussed at the preliminary discussion, and we have it in the record of tonight. So I think things at this point, there wouldn't be anything further for us to add because there is no permit for us to vote upon. I think it's also, this letter is very clear, and I believe, I would assume, but I'll ask, this letter is clear to you as far as what was permitted recently and what is not allowed, and what would be a future avenue to take if needed. Okay, so I think that covers things in that regard. And again, Dan did sign off on whatever document he needed to, and the fire marshal did, because the fire marshal had to sign off as well. And then we would go, we would move accordingly. Joe Palulik.
It may be new. Since we're probably not gonna put any more structure in it, but I still didn't get my question answered as to what's the maximum number of acres that can be developed. on this property?
I thought, did we get that last time or?
Those questions are on.
Isn't that based upon whatever the restrictions are with DOAG? If you can just state, if you can just state your name for the record.
Yes, so at the last meeting, we did not have an answer, but I did come prepared.
Yes, please go ahead. You can answer that.
Extreme rough calculation. But so a reminder is that their development rights are restricted by their DDR itself. So going forward, all uses and construction. So for construction of additional improvements, the rights are construct such other, I'm gonna put the deed first and then I'll run them for you. So the deed says and construct such other improvements and then activities and uses thereon as may be directly or incidentally related to the operation of the agricultural enterprise, as long as the acreage and productivity of arable land for crops does not materially decrease. Due consideration is given to the impact of acreage and productivity of total farm operation. So throughout the entire property, it cannot reduce arable land adversely impact. Provided, however, any new construction of a modification farm building necessary to the operation of the farm on private farmland as defined by the U.S. shall be limited to not more than 5% of the total of such prime farmland of which the statement of purchase development is. So, what I did was, Wisconsin has a nice online GIS mapping system, and one of the layers you can do is actually farmland soils, and it does depict prime farmland soils from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So, and then it has like a mapping tool you can map the area. So that's how I calculated this. But so the total acres of the site according to the tax card is 3.5 acres. Very rough estimate of total prime farmland soil is 50. A little over half the site is prime farmland soil. So 5% of that is 2.5. The existing development, so then I switched over to Google Earth, which also lets you develop aerial. Switching over to Google Earth, it looks like all the existing structures are on the soil area. They're already existing development, already eating into their acres, right? So by that, the structures are approximately 1.2. There is the gravel parking area is a little under an acre, so if that counted, they're maxed out. But I don't think it actually counts. I think it's structured only, and that's a
I
gravel.
believe it's all area that you use where you're taking it out of production.
Where it's not farmland. So if that's the case, then that's also in the prime farmland soil area. So that means the 2.5 is capped. It's not clear to me what this is the remaining 40 acres. It's not farmland soil, but the development is very carefully. Development anywhere on the property cannot necessarily all the
Oh,
The way it's been interpreted with people, farmers building,
yeah.
it's that doesn't matter the total acreage, your acreage of farm buildings can't, or construction area taking it out of production cannot exceed that 5% of the prime farm.
Oh, okay.
And then when this, somewhere in that contract, when the state bought it, I think they delineate the number of acres of prime farmland. This is how they base their price on that. That might not be in a deed, but it
Might
might
be
be.
a recorded deed, but it might be part of the transaction documents or something. I didn't have those on. I could be wrong.
Because they, that's how they base their price on the, you know, if you're selling, if you have 100 acres and 40 of it is 40% of it's swamp.
So just to answer then the question in a nutshell is if one is including the current buildings and whatever gravel parking or whatever, then you're saying it's basically, there's really either no leeway or just not much. Okay. Okay. Did that answer your question, Joe? Or was that you, David?
Yeah, so the buildings.
And then I recognize
buildings
it.
in the parking area are basically on a prime farmland soil.
Yes. GIS map.
Okay.
Map going to be-
All right.
Okay.
So I guess the only future development that's possible would be on non-farmland soil, non-prime farmland soil.
Correct.
Is there anything that stops that?
That I don't believe that's, I think the total development for the property is based on a 5% of the prime. What the prime, well, doesn't mean you can go building on non-prime land, usually non-prime land and that.
Right.
It's not.
So what we're saying is.
My understanding of, from my dealing with it and working with the state is that it's the 5% of the prime farmland is the amount that you can develop on the whole property.
On the whole property, whether it's prime farmland soils or not.
Okay.
I mean, that's my understanding of dealing with them, building buildings and,
Okay. All right,
Well, thank you for the answer.
thank you.
I'm going to recognize Sid Blodgett. Sid, you have your hand up? Or your virtual hand is up?
I realize that.
No, I'm all set. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay. So at this point, then, if there isn't anything further, this matter seems we've gotten the answers to the questions. And the process has been followed. I think things are very clear on the record at this point in time. So thank you. I think this closes the loop, so to speak, and wish you success. Thank you for being a continued part of the community. We're moving past agenda item 7A. We've already dealt with that. Agenda item 8B. Did we get a listing of any permits from Dan or Tracy? We did not. Okay. All right. So we'll find out if there is or isn't. As far as enforcement, there's two matters we need to bring back up relative to where we are. One is that we know that as of April 27th, which happens to be today, Buck's Soft Serve LLC's home occupation permit expires. I know that they have been previously made aware of that situation. They've also been made aware, Dan had told us he was going to send a letter. I'm speaking about this because Dan isn't here tonight, so he had asked me to mention the two items under enforcement. So as of March 14th, a letter did go to the owners of Buck Soft Serve LLC talking about the home occupation permit expiring on today, the 27th of April of this year. And that previously the commission did mention at its October 17, 2019 meeting that likely they're going to be needing, or they would have to consider a special permit to continue in that location. At this point, when I spoke with Dan yesterday, he said he had not received any communication back to his letter. This was just a letter, not a notice of violation. It was just a letter saying, hey, by the way, your permit's expiring and you need to take some sort of action. As of today, the permit is expiring. So my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dio, because you know this process, is once this permit expires and the town hall next reopens on Monday, which is May 1st, a ZEO would then issue a notice of violation?
Still operating.
Okay. So that would then be the next step. Dan had told me that he was gonna be, when he talks with Mike D'Amato, letting Mike know of this situation. Mike's dealt with this before. So he's familiar with what went on before. So he's gonna let Mike D'Amato know. And then Mike D'Amato's capacity as CEO, if indeed Mike's gonna be the person, would be to issue a notice of violation. That's what Dan's gonna tell him. I think there's a meeting next week to go over some things, and so that's what Dan told me. So that's the next step.
You know, that letter that was sent to folks, just indicating that how much they, when it was expiring, and then it would like to be, say would likely.
So what he said here was, the Woodstock Planning and Zoning Commission has asked me to send a letter regarding the expiration of the home occupation permit issued 4/27/18. That type of permit has an expiration of 5 years from issue. At their 10/17/19 meeting, the commission discussed the expanded scope of your operation and voted to allow Bucks to continue under the existing home occupation permit until its expiration on 4/27/23. At that time, the commission expressed that a special permit application would be needed in the future. Please contact the Woodstock Town Planner Delia Fay at your email address to discuss application procedures for a special permit and initiate that process.
So Mike D'Amato.
Yes, and also it's in the record from that meeting as well, where we said, yes, they could continue with the home occupation based upon the matters that were discussed, but that there's going to be an expiration of the home occupation. So this did go out with more than a month's notice to them. So at this point, it really would then be up to if Mike D'Amato to issue a notice of violation. That's just the process that would have to be followed by that office. So that's a follow-up on that. They have already opened, correct? They have. They opened before the expiration of the home occupation permit. But as of today, their permit is expiring. So anything that is going on beyond today is non-compliant. Dan said that that's what he's going to tell Mike D'Amato, that they will be not in compliance, I guess, and a notice of violation has to go out. Rich, did you have something on this matter?
Yeah, I confirmed with Mike that he's
I see
starting
your
on
hands up.
Tuesday. Yeah, I confirmed with Mike that he's starting on Tuesday.
Okay. So good. So this is something that Dan is planning to talk with Mike about, to say that after today, it's in violation and a notice of violation has to go out. That's what he told me. So I'm relaying what Dan told me, because Dan isn't here tonight. So the next matter is something, Delia, you're aware of. A follow-up onto the non-compliance of Supreme Sheds. We've talked about this before. We've given a lot of time for Supreme Sheds to come into compliance. They've been told specifically what they need to do. We did say that we needed to receive an application by our deadline in May, which is May 8th. I know they've been told that. Do you have any update for us? I know there's no application yet received from them.
I have communicated mostly by email with the owner, who's asked me many questions, and also with Norm Tebow from Killing Engineering, and they are in the process of working on an application. And so he expects to submit it in May. They're
Okay.
very busy, but he is working on it.
And I understand he's very busy, but at the other end, this commission has given, I think, a good amount of flexibility and latitude on this matter. And at some point, regulations just have to be enforced. So I would say we look forward to that May 8th. Can you, if you don't mind reminding them?
Sure.
That May 8th is our deadline that we'd like to receive things. If they feel they cannot meet that May 8th, the commission will have to decide what it wishes to do. I believe already notice of violations went out, is my understanding. I don't have the file, but that's where that stands. So, stay tuned. Either we're going to get an application for a special permit or we don't. And then the commission is going to have to decide about moving the process along a different path more. So the matter is in the hands of the business owner. So I'm not aware of any other enforcement matters. Dan did tell me that he has been trying to catch up on enforcement matters, but he didn't tell me there was anything that he needed to relay to us, other than those two items. Joe Palulik?
On that topic, that want to go to the owner of Scranton Shops also then?
Delia, you're the one that's been communicating with
She
them.
didn't send any enforcement letters. I did speak with the owner because he's one who, the only one who's contacted me about this whole issue with many questions that I've answered. So she's aware of the need for the special permit and the deadline. But the enforcement
The
letter,
owner of the overall properties.
Right.
Aware of that.
so the enforcement letter should have been sent to both the owner and the business owner, but I
Yes.
didn't write those letters.
And I don't know who it went to. I don't have the file. So what will happen is Dan will speak with Mike D'Amato. I can ask Dan. He's
Okay.
back in office on Tuesday. So I can ask him who got the letters. I want to think he sent it to the owners and the business owner. Owners of the property and the business owner, but I can't verify that. I don't have access to the file right now, but we can clarify that with him.
Yeah, that would be good to know based upon what Rich told us earlier.
Sid, do you have a question? Your hand's up?
No, I don't. I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Anything else on those two matters? And we'll wait to hear from Mike D'Amato on one and from you on the other. Delia. Okay, sounds good. Budget review and bills. We do have our budget. And also what we've been doing relative to that budget. So again, we review that every month and we've been wise stewards of the taxpayer money. So unless anybody has any questions on that, and we still have our POCD fund there. There are no bills other than there was one small bill that came in actually for reimbursement for the land use seminar. So, which was appropriate to reimburse and I signed it. Are there any citizens' comments not on any agenda items? Do you have something not on an agenda item? No, because there's no application and it was only about preliminary discussion. A decision was that not to distribute it at this time because there's no application. Well, if you're referring to Treehouse, so there is no application at this time that we've taken up. Well, if you were referring to what was discussed during preliminary discussion, there was a decision that had been reached that there was no application, so nothing that we could distribute out. It had to be put into the file. Well, it depends upon what you're trying to communicate on. If you're communicating on an actual application, there's a process that we follow in that regard. But if it's something, for example, for the preliminary discussion, it was felt to be relative to that because it was relative to Treehouse. It would. Well, let me finish because I have the floor right now. Thank you. It was felt that because it was relative to preliminary discussion and there was no application, it had to be put into the file. It otherwise wasn't to be distributed out unless there was going to be some application or something future. If there's something follow-up that you wish to submit to us as something general, or number one, if you had any complaint or concern relative to what Treehouse itself is doing, that can go to the zoning enforcement officer, who then investigates and looks into a concern or a complaint. That doesn't necessarily come directly to us. That there's a process that happens. First, the zoning enforcement officer handles and investigates and renders a decision, or has to get our input if there's something that's unclear with our regulations or interpreting of the regulations. If you had something more general that you wanted to submit that isn't a complaint or a concern specific to one matter that the ZEO has to look into, then that gets looked at as far as what it is. If it's not pertinent to, say, an application that we have, then there's a process to look into relative to what gets out to the commission or the public in that regard. But it was looked into and a decision had been rendered to put it into the file because there was no application to tag it to. Did you have a follow-up question? Oh, I'm sorry, Joe.
Just for clarity, there won't be any.
There is no application at this point in time because there is none. They submitted an application, well, they submitted something in a sense to the land use department that rendered the decision. Did you have a follow-up question?
There is no.
There is no application, correct? So, again, that had been looked into as far as what process we had to follow. This was some discussions behind the scenes, because we do take correspondence very seriously, but we also have to make certain we're handling it a proper legal way. Okay. Oh, yes. Yep. Yep, thank you. Yes, because we have to have it on the record. So, but if you had anything follow-up you wanted to submit, again, if there's any complaint or concern about an existing business or use or whatever, certainly that goes to the land use department. If you had something in general to communicate to us, or sometimes people do in general, then certainly we're happy to hear it. What is your general comment? No, we did say that for relative to this, we did. So, well, people in Woodstock, if they wanted to handle any type of liquor, have to go through a state process and a state permitting. And Treehouse did do that. What? Because so you just can't make your own beer and start selling through a farm stand. This was actually, you have to go through a process with the state. This was involving the Department of Agriculture, Department of Consumer Protection. This is being done on an existing recognized farm. So there is a process the state follows in that regard. My understanding is that's different from someone who just decides to do it themselves and sell it. So this is a process specific to agriculture itself as certified by the state. If that answers your question. We're happy to try to clarify it for you.
Well, the commission declared that no permit is necessary.
This is being produced on a farm, so that's not quite what we said. This is looking at what Treehouse is doing. What's emanating from this is Treehouse is a recognized agricultural entity, a farm, as recognized by the Department of Agriculture and also recognized by the Department of Consumer Protection as far as being able to ferment. So that's where this emanates from. So the DOAG has signed off and certified, and the Department of Consumer Protection, through its liquor control division, then followed, did its review and process, and then certified. So there is a bunch of steps that preceded then when we say it's agriculture. We're saying that it's agriculture because of the way of how it's being handled on the farm itself, and what's being done in that regard. And then that gets into what our definition of agriculture is, which matches the state in that regard. But the state could have said, can come in and say to somebody, you're not doing agriculture, you're not, this is different, you don't have a farm for us to certify or DCP to certify. So there was a whole bunch of steps that preceded this at the state level. Did that answer the question for you?
No.
Okay, because we're happy to try to get more clarification if you wanted that.
You declared that my correspondence.
Okay. But if you wanted anything further follow-up relative to that, something general, we're happy to, hear from you if you wanted to submit anything further to try to get some further answers, we're happy to work that through the land use department office and see what we can do to clarify questions for you. Right, but it was deemed that that was relative to what was happening with the prelim discussion. If there's something separate to submit, we're happy to see it. But again, when we receive documents and correspondence, we do have to be mindful of certain legal ways of handling things. So that was looked into. Did you have any other questions? Okay, well, thank you for being here tonight. It's good to see you again. We don't have any correspondence that I was told about. That takes us to the last item. I'm sorry, what?
Just this book was recently updated. It's what's legally required by Michael Ziska. It's a great resource for land use commissions. We recommend that your commission get at least one copy. And in the past, they've been very hard to get after the initial printing, so I was able to get them I ordered them the first day I found out about it, and they came, I think they came like 2 weeks later. But you should get one for the commission.
Can I just see that for a second, Delia? So the commission now has a copy. So we're gonna mark this planning and zoning. So can I just write down the name of that, Delia? Let me write down the name. What does it say? So it's what's legally required?
I'd like to recommend. Commission purchase at least.
We could see what to do. Let me just see, what's the edition of this one, Delia? Does it say?
Should inside.
8th edition,
I think they're now
2023. I'll take a
cleaner
picture.
or something.
Where'd you get yours from?
Remember, but in the past, they were printed by DEP and they had very limited. When I had one when I was a planner like 22 years ago in Conway, you have one and you can never get any more.
So where does this come out of? Who wrote this?
No, they
one?
just didn't print them anymore. Michael Ziska.
But where is this coming from?
I don't remember. I requested the office order. We have like 4 of them. For the
Well,
whole.
we can look into this. Is this coming, is
You
this,
can find an email that tells you where to order them.
can you send it to me and then I can work with Tracy in the land use office? So where is this coming out of though? Which agent? Is this coming from a state agency? Clear. Oh, it's
Yeah,
published in partnership with the Connecticut Deep.
Because they used to have to get it from them, but they
Okay.
printed like just barely enough. Like
So
one
it's-
time. And then there was never need to get any more.
Okay,
Are they available online? Can you read them?
I don't know.
well, we can look into. I also note there's an acknowledgement here that says, I wish to thank the following individuals. And there's somebody named Richard Roberts on the list. So he's being thanked in this book. I bet
yeah, I
you he
can
has
get it autographed for you if you want it. Yeah, Deep didn't want to continue publishing it, so we worked with Yukon Clear to kind of step into their shoes as the state agency sponsoring it.
Okay. Well, we'll look into this then and see if you can send me whatever. I'll talk with Tracy in the office. We do have in our budget, the availability to do that for resources. So we can look into that then. Okay, well, thank you, Delia. That takes us to the last agenda item. I do notice that Mark Blackmer and Timothy Young are not here, so Dwight? So motion by Dwight Rhinowitz, seconded by Joe Adaletta. I gotta go through the roll. Joe Adaletta? Sid Blodgett, Jeff Gordon, I, Dean Gould. Jeff Marcotte,
Aye.
David Morse,
Aye.
Joe Palulik, White. Okay, that so passes. We're adjourned at whatever time you have, Amy, and I gotta shut this off recording, right?